As I reflected on the question, what this year means to me, the two themes that came up for me were struggle and freedom. I think it has been a year of struggle for us as a community, for me personally, as we reckon with COVID-19 and the effects that that has had for the mental health community, as we struggle to reckon with the legacy of racism and white supremacy, not just in the country but in the department, there have been struggle. But there's also been opportunity, and I've been really inspired by my colleagues, not just in the residency program, but in other places in the department, who are not only consistently showing up as themselves and being free within our spaces, but also trying to create a space for others, to be creative, to reimagine, and to be free. There's a song by the ancestor Donny Hathaway that talks about this idea of finding freedom despite struggle, and that's something that we can all do collectively. So I'm going to do a little bit of that. It's called Someday We'll All Be Free. Hang on to the world as it spins around. Just don't let the spin get you down. Things are moving fast. Just hold on tight and you will last. Take it from me, someday we'll all be free.
Hello. Last year was about change. It was painful to see the suffering and the loss. But I remain hopeful and inspired by the way that we came together to deliver services and teaching in new and creative ways. From our social distance and the long wait for the vaccine, we're now ready to emerge with a broader perspective that will be useful for our lives. Thank you for all the support to each other, and welcome back.
I struggle to find the words to describe what this year has meant to me. It has been a year of unimaginable challenges. The challenges have been many and on different fronts. From the first news stories of a deadly virus spreading across the world, I had a sense that we were in for a roller coaster ride. I just had no idea how many twists and turns it would take. By the beginning of March, I had a sense that it was a matter of days before we would be in the grip of the pandemic. I recall seeing a patient on contact precautions, and as I took off and discarded my gown and gloves, I decided to keep my mask. I had a feeling that I would be needing it, and it turns out I was right. And for the next month, that was the mask I wore every time I had to see a consult in the hospital. During those first few weeks and months, uncertainty became a blanket that I carried with me every moment of the day. The only time I was able to shed the weight of that blanket was during family movie time, which had become our nightly routine. April came, and with it, my husband's placement in a step-down unit caring for COVID-positive patients. He worked 12 to 14-hour days, 6 days a week for the entire month. And while he cared for COVID patients, I stayed home and cared for our school-age children doing distance learning and for my clinic patients via telehealth. While so much of our lives have been turned upside down, it was comforting to know that I could still be there for my patients, and at times in a much more intimate way than before. I still remember helping a patient say goodbye to his father as his health slowly deteriorated at home and he refused to seek medical care. We spoke 2 times a week, sometimes more, until his father passed. And then came the work to help him heal. During this time, I also joined an effort with palliative care in which we began providing decompression huddles for the staff in the ICU. It was yet another way in which I could help give back. The sense of purpose and meaning in the things I was doing propelled me forward and helped me overcome the fear and uncertainty. Then came summer and the civil unrest that sparked by the murder of George Floyd and countless other Black Americans that reignited a national conversation about racism that was long overdue. I struggled with anger and frustration. For many of my patients who had lost brothers, sons, and partners at the hands of police, it was re-traumatizing. The roller coaster had just taken an unexpected twist. This was another moment when my resolve was tested, and I had a choice to give in to the anger and despair or persevere. As we know, the year was far from over, and many challenges lay ahead between the political unrest over the election and the second wave of COVID among them. So what kept me going? My family, my sense of responsibility, and my faith that our shared humanity would help us build a path forward. So when I think about what the last year has meant to me, it has really been a year of challenge that has pushed me to grow and to overcome. It has been a year of resilience.
Han Atebarash Day. My name is Stephanie Gilson. I am Dakota Sioux as well as Swedish. I am a fourth year psychiatry resident, outgoing, as well as a public psychiatry fellow. I'm originally from Minnesota Maconch, also known as Minnesota. It's the land of my people as well as the Ojibwe people. Currently, I am on Quinnipiac land. This year for me has really stretched me to think about how to maintain community virtually, whether that's here at Yale, New Haven, or with the Indigenous communities that I work with in the Midwest, and to get creative on how to support them. And I think most importantly, listen to what I can do from afar. You know, we saw a really disproportionate rate of COVID-19 on our communities of color and our non-white communities, specifically our Indigenous communities in the United States. We were hit hard with the pandemic and a lot of the numerous issues that came along, as well as being unable to participate in ceremonies and things that are really kind of the core of our culture. But we also saw some really magnificent things this past year. We saw the first Native American to be Department of Secretary of Interior, Deb Haaland. We saw the years of advocacy to dismantle the racist mascots finally have some resolution. We saw our youth and elders protest the oil pipelines that are going through our land. We even saw a slight return of our land to our communities. And I think most importantly, we saw how our communities use centuries of accumulated knowledge to fight this pandemic. We saw our tribes early on shut borders, contain and quarantine their tribal members, provided food, water, medicine, transportation. We saw communities like the Cherokee Nation who right away when the vaccine was available start vaccinating 500 people a day. We saw the Navajo Nation call Doctors Without Borders in to provide additional medical care when the Indian Health Service could not. We saw our communities in the Midwest prioritize our elders who spoke our Indigenous language to get vaccinated first. Our elders are very important to us, and they are vital in continuing to pass on the knowledge and tradition of our culture. And I think that one of the biggest things to recognize is that we are one of the fastest growing minorities in the United States. And although media and popular culture tends to depict us as figures of the past, wearing headdresses or looking like Pocahontas, most of us live in urban areas. And despite the centuries of attempted genocide, erasure, forced assimilation, Native people continue to adopt and survive, and we are still here. We continue to pass on the knowledge that we've learned to the next generation. So that being said, I'm proud. I'm proud to be Indigenous. Fidami Ado. Thank you.
Grateful to have the opportunity to really reflect on what has this past year meant for me. It has been one of intense pain, vicarious trauma, joy, and also a time of reckoning. Let me explain just a bit. Intense pain, given all of the losses, unexpected losses of mentors, patients, friends, and family, all related to COVID-19. As an addiction doc, it is really so hard to stomach all of the unnecessary deaths related to poor drug policy. I also think, as a Black woman living in America, one cannot minimize the intense frustration watching people that look like you being terrorized. It seemed almost daily, really culminating in the assassination of George Floyd. And one of my mentors, Dr. Ogabegde, talked about George Floyd as a saint, Saint George Floyd. And I really appreciate that framing, because really thinking about how his death will not be in vain. And as a result of the public display of what happened, his murder, there has been a reckoning across this country, internationally, but even in our community at Yale, in terms of how do we commit to anti-racist practices, for sure, but go a step further to really fight for racial justice, right? The existence, really building structures that are more equitable. On a personal note, as I mentioned, I lost an amazing mentor and colleague and friend, Kathy Carroll, and think about how I want to continue her legacy and producing excellent scholarship and really pouring into the next generation of young people in pursuit of scholarly excellence. I will say that the resilience of who we are as a community was really magnified through the town halls during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. I was so grateful to work with amazing colleagues in order to hold space to allow people to process that pain and think about collectively how we might get through a really, really tough time. Personally, it was a professional milestone because I got awarded my first NIH grant, R01. And so that was really a time of celebration. It doesn't fall, the gravity of that situation is huge, realizing that I am one of the less than 1% of NIH funded researchers who are Black. And so it's a bittersweet, a time of celebration, but also a time that just reminds us of how far we have yet to go. So I leave you with those thoughts. This is the state, from my point of view, or where we are. And in terms of where we need to go, I think we have a far way ahead. But like, you know, structural racism did not start overnight. It has been the process of at least 400 years. I know that we have to collectively commit to dismantling these structures. And I am excited about the opportunity for people who are really serious about doing things differently to join in as we move forward. So thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to share my reflections.
Hi, everyone. My name is Karima Robinson. I am the coordinator of medical and professional staff here at CMHC in the Department of Psychiatry. I'm delighted to be asked to talk about what this year has meant to me. So I want to thank Dr. Crystal for inviting me to share a little bit of my personal story. So this past year has been really, really horrible. I'm sorry to say, but it's been pretty horrible. We all have suffered great loss because of COVID, loss of people that we love, and loss of just personal freedoms. We had to wear masks for our own safety, and I support the mask wearing even now. We had all sorts of travel restrictions, which we had to comply with. So it was a big change of lifestyle for us with dealing with COVID. So that was, it was challenging, but it wasn't horrible. I think the horrible part was not being able to visit family members because of COVID, family members who ended up, some of them died, some of them didn't. But so that restriction was especially painful during this past year. So I had 2 aunts who had COVID. One survived and one did not. And we were not able to visit her in her final days, which was heartbreaking. I had 2 uncles who passed away this past year, and I lost my father, which was a huge loss to me and my family. So it has been a really, really tough and painful year this year. So COVID has not been kind to any of us. And they were not all COVID-related deaths, but they happen during this COVID time that we are now living in. Also this year, we had this reemergence of Black Lives Matter movement, which is born out of tragedy, right? So we had to sort of endure the tragedy of that video of George Floyd over and over and over again, which was incredibly painful to watch and to witness and to realize that this is happening again and again and again, years and years and years after Emmett Till and so many other people that were still experiencing this. So that was a different kind of pain of 2020 and the COVID era, is having to live through that whole experience of his loss, other people who died in similar ways, including Breonna Taylor, and then going through the whole trial. It was incredibly painful for so many of us, and we all had to suffer that together. It forced me to think about 2 questions that I had to ask myself as a result of that. And one is, how do I, in my everyday life, uplift white supremacy? That was a tough question because I don't think of myself as someone who's doing that, but we all survive in this society which does do that. So I had to question myself as a gatekeeper, and how do I contribute in some ways, even unwillingly, how do I contribute? And so I realized that my silence, when I see racial bias happening, is a contributing factor. Even though I know sometimes that silence is for my own protection, right? To continue to survive in this society. Silence is sometimes, very often required. So I had to just sort of name that and acknowledge that this year. The other question is, what am I doing to dismantle racism? So on one hand, I'm complicit, like we all are, I think. And on the other hand, have to really think about how I'm working to dismantle racism. So it made me recommit to my other outside part-time sort of work with different nonprofit organizations that I'm part of that are committed to social justice. So I felt even more committed to those organizations to volunteer my time where and when I can to support my community. And also, I guess the silver lining is that I was invited to be part of the Department of Psychiatry Anti-Racism Task Force, which sort of was brought about in part because of George Floyd's death. So having a seat at the table is kind of a first, that staff have not really been included in departmental affairs at that level. So being invited to participate was an honor, and I'm very proud to serve and happy to be part of it. So that is a silver lining for me, having a seat at the table, not just for me, but for all staff. And having staff participation in that group is really important to me. And I think it sort of symbolizes like the opening of a door. Like maybe there's more room in the department for staff to participate in different things that happen. And maybe there's more room for people of color to have different sorts of leadership roles in the department. So I think that's the silver lining of this year. It's been a horrible, tragic year, but I think the silver lining is that people are more conscious of systemic racism and trying to be more thoughtful about how we combat systemic racism. And I'm really proud to be part of that effort. So that's my silver lining after this very horrible, tragic year, that I am part of the solution, I hope, and I try to be part of the solution to dismantling systemic racism. So thanks again for the opportunity to share. Again, I'm delighted to serve and happy to be part of it.
Hello, everyone. It's nice to be with you. I retired over 2 years ago. Nearly my entire social world revolved around the Yale Psychiatry Department and the VA. I no longer had an office or good reasons to visit Yale or the VA on a regular basis. And with the start of COVID, it looked as if the situation would get even worse. I also started to feel guilty about not being in the hospital on the front line, having no way to contribute. I liked being on the front line and felt that my role as a physician and caretaker was slipping away. Even though I tried to internalize my father's lifelong motto, I'm not okay, you're not okay, but it's okay, I still felt pretty irrelevant. Then John called. He asked if I would consider becoming a member of a COVID-19 mental health task force. Then Ismini called and asked if I might join her to give a talk about resilience to VA and Yale internists. Then I got married to Bernadette, my partner of 20 years. I was back with my teammates, back with a renewed sense of purpose. Perhaps I could contribute, even if in a small way. Which brings to mind Helen Keller's wisdom. I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my chief duty to accomplish small tasks as if they were great and noble. And recently I learned that the Yale Department of Psychiatry has been rated the #1 department in the United States. Just think about that. You and I have the opportunity to work for a great department whose clinical, educational, and research mission is to help those who are suffering with mental illness. What could be better than that? So this year, in a way, I rejoined the department by joining the task force, giving the talk with Ismini, and also teaming up with colleagues to investigate the impact of the pandemic on frontline healthcare workers. Here's a passage from a manuscript that we recently published about frontline healthcare workers. I quote from it because it is relevant to how I personally experienced this past year. Quote, Navy SEALs and Special Forces soldiers often attribute their own courage and resilience to the power of team members who have each other's back and will even risk their life for one another. The message from healthcare leaders should be clear. Team, team, team. You are your brother and sister's keeper. We are all in this together, fighting for a common noble cause. It is a privilege to be working alongside such remarkable colleagues. For me, this year has been filled with distress and great concern for all those who have suffered from the devastating impact of the pandemic, and for the toxic political divisions in our country, and for long-standing and pervasive social, racial, economic, and healthcare disparities. But this year has also been filled with renewed purpose, courageous and resilient role models, gratitude, and the privilege to work with and care deeply about my wonderful colleagues who are both teammates and cherished friends. Thank you for having my back.
One day in February this year, I got a text message from one of my medical school friends, and I learned our mutual friend passed away in April 2020. He was the first person I met when I came to this country. He helped me move, gave me a ride to grocery shopping, and taught me how to drive. He was younger than me. So grieving of his loss has been very challenging. The most difficult part for me is I didn't know his past until 10 months later, because we were disconnected in past several years. Like many friends in this country, we didn't talk for several years due to our different point of view. After lost this friend, I asked myself, is this worth it? So this friend make me have a better understanding of complexity of grieving in 2020. I hope this make me become a better psychiatrist. As a scientist, 2020 was exciting and inspiring. With all vaccines developed, we have a hope to end this pandemic. I hope one day our work can contribute to improve human life as well. Overall, I'm very fortunately, my life has not been greatly negatively impacted by the pandemic. Day in, day out seems similar. Yet everything seems changed because everything seems to have a different meaning now. I think as long as we're kind and generous to each other, I think we're going to be okay.